Natacha Pennycooke is an award-winning psychotherapist, international speaker, and clinical consultant. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Deborah, for having me.
I'm curious, first of all, what are you seeing in your practice right now? Are people more anxious than, say, at the height of the pandemic?
So it's interesting. What myself and my therapist are seeing in our practice right now is that there is some apprehension around the reopening, right? Things are finally starting to reopen after we've been in this pandemic for almost 3 years. And even though there has been uncertainty throughout this pandemic and really wanting to get out there to re-socialize, there is a lot of worry and anxiety around the unknown, right? There's so many unknowns that are happening in terms of what are going to be the new protocols moving forward. There's health anxiety. We've seen such an increase in health anxiety over the last number of years. People really being fearful for themselves, for their loved ones, whether they're taking care of older parents and grandparents at home, or they're really worried about younger children. There is a lot of the health anxiety that is coming around with, we just don't know, right? We just don't know.
Yeah, and so how do you deal with that? Let's say you're a person who feels comfortable with easing the mandates, and then you come across somebody who isn't so comfortable. Is it important to have conversations, or maybe just stay away from that stress altogether?
Well, I think that's exactly it. It's having those conversations, because my level of comfortability may be very different from yours, and that's okay. But we will never know if we never exchange in a dialogue and have a conversation about that. I mean, right? Prior to the pandemic, it might have been okay to embrace someone or give high fives or shake hands, but now that is really dependent on an individual's level of comfort, and we really have to start being okay with being uncomfortable to have those conversations.
Okay, so now add the war in Ukraine, and even, people talk about nuclear war at this point. You add that to the mix, and so, how do you deal with that? Because there's an element of a lack of control in all of this, too, a helplessness, even a guilt. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There is a guilt, there is a helplessness, there's an uncertainty, right? And that's actually a hallmark of anxiety, being worried, having the stress, nervousness, and fear of unknown situations and surrounding. So now, on top of everything that we've been going through with the pandemic, a lot of people have been feeling symptoms of trauma, of feeling like there's no way to cope, to deal with the feelings of worry and stress and anxiety and helplessness. And now tack on a war on top of that, and we're seeing a lot of different feelings that are coming up in individuals that are connected to feelings that we were going through at the beginning of the pandemic. There is a big uncertainty that's happening, and we're also seeing like inflation, right? That is something that we're seeing in terms of not only gas prices but food prices right across our nation and definitely across the globe. So there is more worry that's happening, and I think what individuals need to do is to be very mindful of what they're going through, where their stress levels are, being able to talk about their feelings and their emotionality, to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this. Because something that I see in our practice a lot of times is that people get so accustomed and used to suppressing these hard emotions, keeping them down, keeping them at bay. But what happens, we know they start to trickle back up. So I think the more that we can normalize having conversations around, hey, this is really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch what's happening in the world, and it's really uncomfortable feeling in me. I think that if we start normalizing that, it's going to pave the way for other conversations to come forward.
All right, so talk about this. Don't keep it in the background.
Don't keep it in the background.
Maybe a little bit of self-care, too. Give yourself a break.
Yeah, give yourself a break. Show compassion and gratitude to yourself, right? We've gone through a pandemic, right? I think a lot of people have been so focused on the day-to-day, I guess it's a day-to-day life that's been happening, that we are not giving ourselves grace, that we've gone through a pandemic. This is really hard. So I think on top of self-care, how I speak about self-care with my clients is really mentioning, of course, do the bubble baths and all of that, but also being very mindful of showing yourself some self-love, some compassion, some kindness, and showing each other some kindness as well.
I think that's great advice. I'm going to take that too as well. Natacha Pennycooke, thanks for coming on today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is great.